Are you feeling tired? I mean, really, truly exhausted? You're definitely not alone. It seems like everywhere you look, we're being told we're in the middle of a massive sleep deprivation crisis, that we're sleeping less than our parents, our grandparents, basically any generation before us. It's a really compelling story, but you have to wonder, is it the whole story? So let's just start with that big, basic question. Are Americans actually sleeping less now than ever before? This is the one assumption that kicks off thousands of articles and wellness posts every single year. But what does the data really say when you look back over the decades? Well, it turns out the answer is probably not what you'd expect. Because when researchers really dug into decades of information, they found something that pretty much challenges this entire narrative. The real picture of how we sleep is way more complicated and, honestly, a lot more interesting. Okay, so let's tackle this big myth head on. To do that, we have to look at a major analysis that pulled together information over a 30-year period. The goal was to see if this national trend of sleep loss actually exists. First things first, we need to be on the same page about what we're talking about. When studies look at sleep deprivation, they're often focused on the number of short sleepers. And that's just the clinical term for someone who regularly gets less than 6 hours of sleep at night, which is considered insufficient for most adults. And here it is. This is the bombshell finding. After digging through 8 huge, nationally representative studies covering over 73,000 people across 3 decades, they found no significant trend. The percentage of Americans getting less than 6 hours of sleep, it didn't really change. And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the data says we're not sleeping less on average, why does it feel like everyone is walking around completely wiped out all the time? Well, this means the real story isn't in the average. It's hidden deep inside the details. So let's start peeling back the layers of that national average, because once you start to look at specific groups inside the population, a totally different and frankly a much more concerning picture of sleep starts to emerge. And here is where the whole story just flips on its head. When those same researchers looked at just full-time workers, boom, the trend appeared. For this group, the chances of being a short sleeper did significantly increase over time. This tells us that the burden of sleep loss isn't being spread around evenly at all. And that gap gets even wider when we look at race and gender. One systematic review found that while about 27% of white women reported getting short sleep, that number jumps all the way to 37% for Black women. That is a massive difference, and it shows that some communities are carrying a much heavier burden of exhaustion. And then there's socioeconomic status, which is another huge factor. Research shows that people in lower income brackets are more than 1.5 times more likely to get insufficient sleep. So sleep, it turns out it's not the great equalizer we might think it is. Okay, so these numbers are pretty stark in the US, but you have to wonder, is this just us? Are these same patterns happening elsewhere? To really get the full context, we've got to zoom out and see if this is part of a bigger global phenomenon. So let's go global. A huge study that looked at 8 different countries across Africa and Asia gives us this really rare window into sleep health in low-income and developing nations. And what they found is eye-opening. This quote from the study really sets the stage. They found that as these countries go through rapid economic and social change, sleep problems are bubbling up as a major, but often completely overlooked, public health crisis. And the variation from country to country is just staggering. I mean, look at this. In Bangladesh, over 40% of older adults reported having severe sleep problems. In South Africa, it was about 1 in 4. But then you look at Indonesia, and it's less than 4%. The reasons are super complex, tied to everything from local culture to economics. But even with all that variation, one clear pattern emerged, and it's going to sound really familiar. In every single country they studied, women and the elderly were consistently more likely to suffer from sleep problems. So it seems certain groups are more vulnerable, no matter where on the planet they live. Okay, so we've established who is losing the most sleep. The next critical question is why? And maybe even more important, why is it so incredibly hard for the people most affected to get a diagnosis and actually get some help? Well, the answer is this whole web of interconnected barriers. It can start with something as simple as not even knowing the symptoms of a sleep disorder. But even if you do, being uninsured, living miles away from a clinic, or having a job that won't give you time off can make getting help basically impossible. You add in things like the digital divide and a history of medical mistrust, and you have a system that is just exhausting to navigate. And this is where all those abstract barriers become painfully real. Think about it. The gold standard for diagnosing sleep problems is an overnight study in a lab. That's a system designed for someone with a flexible schedule, childcare, and extra money. For a single parent or someone working multiple low-wage jobs just to get by, it's simply not an option. All of this really forces us to reframe this entire conversation. We started out with a simple question about how many hours we sleep, but we've ended up in a much deeper place, a conversation about fairness, access, and social justice. So, where do we go from here? Well, as sleep expert Dr. Dana Johnson argues, the solution isn't just about telling individuals to try harder. It's about systemic change. It's about creating policies that guarantee access to care, educating the public, and crucially, bringing that expert care directly into the communities that have been left behind for so long. Which really leaves us with one final challenging question. We all accept that diet and exercise are pillars of public health. But when it comes to sleep, do we treat it as a personal luxury that you have to figure out all on your own? Or is the ability to get a truly good night's rest a fundamental public health right that our society has a duty to protect for everyone?